Uh, I see Levi right now. Now I see Lucas.
Back in the
Now I see you.
back in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan kind of surprised everybody by offering to illegal immigrants to the United Nations what many have considered to be a general amnesty, which allowed them to stay in the United States, essentially without punishment. Since then, the question of immigration has been one that has been very controversial in the United States, and one that we've been wrestling for the last 10 to 15 years at least. Good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of the CU Seminars Political Science course discussions on current events and current topics. I have today my esteemed panelists, Kidada Dowell, Levi Ratliff, Lucas Costa, and Rebecca Hoffman. And today we're going to be discussing the question of immigration and immigration reform. We have some technical issues going on, so please be mindful of that as we're moving through the conversation. But I guess first of all, I'm going to start off with just a question to anybody. Does somebody want to talk to me a little bit about exactly what immigration is and why is it such a big issue in the United States?
Well, immigration, as we know it, I suppose, is when a people or persons come from their native country, their land, and they move and seek to find citizenship in another country. And particularly for America, we find such an influx in people desiring to move to our country and to become citizens of our country because we've got this persona of the American dream that there's religious and political and social freedoms here that may not be expressed in other countries. And so I think that's why America has such an influx and such a rise in immigration.
The issue, the reason why immigration and immigration reform is such a recurring problem, especially for the American societies, that many have attempted to solve this issue, address it properly, finding a common balance between immigrants and the domestic people. But there are a lot of misconceptions concerning immigrants that a lot of the American population can't seem to understand all the factors being imposed to them and how could the government properly address the situation of having immigrants come into the United States.
Immigration is an issue because of the several assumptions, like you said, when it comes to people in the United States. Um, they have several assumptions of when we have immigrants coming, are they affecting us financially, economically, which is when it comes to the assumptions that we have. Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? It's either way, but it all matters of what we think of it when it comes to immigrants.
And it was like Kirara said, the idea of the American dream is basically summarizes the reason, most of the reasons why immigrants seek the United States as a final destination. Either they will be looking for jobs, escaping their realities in their respective countries, or seeking job opportunities, education opportunities, and for that they would see the United States as a goal country for them, where they a place where they can achieve those goals.
I completely agree with what Lucas said. You can even see in the 1990s, when the economy was working very well, that there was actually an influx of immigrants moving into the country. But as the recession happened in 2008, you actually saw a decline in the amount of immigrants that started coming into the country because there were no longer job opportunities, so there was no real reason to come over.
And adding to what you said is the idea of the United States knew how to handle the crisis in the 1930s better than other countries. And for that, the immigrants knew and they could see the disparity from where where the American population would rise from a really big crisis, economic crisis, and make it work. So immigrants do realize the situation that was imposed to the Americans and how they handle the situation and how they are progressing as a society. So.
Right, and I think the freedoms that we share for those who aren't natives to our country or to this country, America, I think, like you said, it's attractive, not just the government system, but the opportunities that we have here. They can come and they can work, and our wage system and our economic system, at least at that time, and I guess some would argue now, is set up superior to the places that they may be coming from, and so there's opportunities that are greater here to make more money and to make a better living, and even if their families don't come with them, to send back home so their families in their native countries can have a better life.
Are there particular types of opportunities, particular degree areas, particular industries or occupations that many of the immigrants are being drawn to from their home countries?
I think number one is definitely like in the agriculture area. It's easier to find someone who's not native to this country that's more willing to work in harsh conditions, I guess, outside when it's time to harvest crops and to plant crops and to work the land. And a lot of times you've got farmers who own private land, and it's not as strict as far as keeping documentation on who's working on your farm, and they can pay them lower wages or they can pay them under the table. And so, taxes aren't such an issue. And I think they're attracted to that because most times when we get immigrants to this country, they're not afraid to take the jobs that some Americans would deny.
But here's a fun fact. People usually don't address the other extreme, the other side of the coin, is that, for example, by the numbers in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, about 35% of all the civil engineers in the engineering area were immigrants, and about 30% of the population that is involved in the computer science area, they're immigrants. So at the same time that you see in one extreme where immigrants are willing to do the low-paid jobs, they're also involved in the other extreme where they would mark their presence in the higher hierarchy of jobs.
And I think that's a good point, Lucas, because oftentimes we think of, I don't want to say negative side of immigration, but oftentimes the illegal side of immigration, and we forget that in this country there are laws that provide legal paths to citizenship for those who maybe necessarily don't come from a poor economic background, but they do see opportunities in America in the civil engineer fields and technology fields that aren't available in their home country, or there are just more opportunities here. And so that's a really good point.
And that's what it is, in my opinion, the biggest misconception that creates this negative understanding on immigrants is this generalization. Therefore, they should be treated, receive the same treatment, where in reality there are two different ways to address a situation, the illegal portion and the legal portion, but both are being labeled as immigrants, and then you have a roadblock there.
Yeah, and I think sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I think a lot of it comes down to just the ignorance of typical American citizens, I guess, who aren't as involved in legislation and the passing of legislation that know which laws do make it legal for immigrants to come here. And sometimes some situations are easier than others, and we find those situations where people do come here legally and they don't come necessarily from poor economic backgrounds, and they do have success in this country.
So it sounds like you're painting two different pictures, right? I mean, on the one hand, I've been hearing from politicians, mostly liberal politicians, that immigration isn't a problem because they're filling jobs that nobody else in the United States wants. Agricultural jobs, picking lettuce, picking flowers, whatever, these temporary positions or jobs that are kind of seasonal in nature. But Mr. Costa, what you seem to be painting is a different story, that in fact there might actually be jobs, good jobs, high-paying jobs, highly skilled jobs that Americans might actually want, that they might be qualified for, that immigrants are taking. Does this mean that the conservative rhetoric is actually true, that there are a lot of high-paying American positions that are being taken by immigrants?
It is true, and there is, I don't know if that could explain one of the reasons why, I'm not sure if the viewers are familiar with, back in 2012, it was raised a proposition called the DREAM Act, and it failed in Congress. It didn't go through, where it would help this high educated scholars or students that are seeking those positions, and it failed in Congress, and it could not pass which would help the immigrants as students that are coming to the United States to seek that kind of job. So yes, that is a real problem that it's not being properly addressed by the politicians. But yeah, that's a reality here, where you would see that in that other extreme that you asked, where there is this high position jobs, that it's being threatened by the presence of immigrants that are actually seeking those jobs that Americans could potentially be taking them.
Mr. Ratliff, what do you think? Do you think that this is a fair analysis, that in fact it's fair to say that Americans are losing good, high-paying jobs to immigrants, or do you think that really it's just kind of a myth?
I think there's truth to it, but I believe that it's more important to look at how many job openings there are in America right now. Right now there are over 5 million job openings, and it's been that way for several months. There hasn't been people taking in these jobs, and there are a lot of people saying that bringing in more immigrants, making them legal citizens where they can pay in taxes. A lot of them pay in Social Security, and they'll never get anything out of it because they're not citizens. They're paying money into Social Security while working, and then they're never going to get any of that money out. I mean, in 1 year, normally about $12 billion from illegal immigrants goes into Social Security. It just helps kind of pay for that system. There's jobs that Americans don't want to work. Their wages are stagnant right now, and they just see it. It's not really worth their time to do some of these jobs, and immigrants are willing to come over and do a lot of these jobs that are available.
You mentioned that immigrants are paying into Social Security, but shouldn't we also be worried about immigrants applying for Medicare benefits or Medicaid benefits? Should we be worried about immigrants getting welfare benefits? Immigrants, their students enrolling in our schools, which costs more money. When thinking about the net effect of immigration on public policy, are they in net positive because they're going to be paying into Social Security and supporting these programs and maybe paying sales taxes, or are they a net negative because of any benefits that they may receive or they may apply for?
Okay, well, the CBO actually did a study on this, I think in 2012 or 2013, and it said that it's pretty even, actually. There's not really immigrants coming over don't cost the American people any money, and in some cases they actually make the United States money. There's not really a negative for a lot of it coming in. They said that one case showed that, like, in the lifetime it would cost Americans about $80,000 for their entire life of immigrants coming over for them to go to school to get into these programs without having paid taxes before. But like recent studies said that number was a little bloated. It's probably closer to $50,000 for their entire lifetime. Then you have them paying in for their entire life. If they become national citizens, they pay in taxes on Social Security.
Yeah, in either way. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say I agree with Levi. That the more they're not stealing our jobs, they're not. I don't really think that they are taking any benefits away from us. We have those that don't basically go through the path of citizenship correctly. But the more immigrants we have, there has shown an increase in jobs when it comes to the rates of the economics. So they're not taking anything away. They're increasing employment. We have all these jobs, and they're coming and taking some of the jobs that they have that are open. And then because of that, we have American citizens that might feel threatened by that, but they shouldn't feel threatened. They're coming here for a better opportunity, and as long as they go through the correct pathway of becoming a citizen, I don't think that they should be anything different than us here in America.
But go ahead.
There's no need to worry at all, because based by the numbers, let's just analyze the numbers. About 50% of all the immigrants, they don't even receive the health insurance that they're actually paying for it. 5 years ago, from the GDP from the United States, about $10 billion were raised from the hands of immigrants. And yet 50% of them can't even have access to, as in the public policy level, they can't even have access to health insurance and health benefits from the government. And yet there's this other side where Americans feel threatened by, where in reality they don't even have access to it.
Well, I get the difference that I think that Ms. Hoffman and others were making earlier, that there's a distinction between legal immigration and illegal immigration. Okay, I get that. And I guess I get that there is a legal process by which immigrants follow to come here, and many who come here illegally. But then why don't all immigrants just choose the legal path? Why do they choose to come here illegally if it's possible to come here legally and gain access to these positions?
Because the bureaucracy required for legal immigrants to come to the United States, it's so extensive and it's such a bureaucratic process that it exhausts the options for the immigrants to come in the time frame that they want to. So they would run out of options and just appeal for the most cost benefit and time benefit for them, which most of the times would mean coming to the United States illegally.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about these people. Some of them are leaving from really bad circumstances, and this process is tedious, and it takes a lot of paperwork and a lot of time before they actually get to where they can become members of citizens. And some of these people aren't in any position to wait that long, so they see it as their best opportunity to just go ahead and come into the country and maybe later on go through the process.
Right. I mean, the average immigration case takes about 578 days, and like you said, these people are oftentimes fleeing circumstances that aren't, what we would deem as suitable living conditions, and so they're not going to wait that amount of time. And not to mention the legislation that's in place now oftentimes funds border security and how to stop people from getting in the country, rather than funding more immigration judges and getting these immigration cases through court. And so the legal option, though we would see it as the one that should be taken, is not necessarily the one that's always the most beneficial.
But would y'all agree that on some level the process to let people in, right? So we need some kind of a process to know who's here. The process is designed to limit the number of people. I believe something like 2 million immigrants per year. What do you think the appropriate number is? If it's true that we have upwards of 12 million immigrants who are here illegally, what is the appropriate number for immigrants who should be in the United States at one point?
I think if we're 10 million over our allotted limit and we're still sustaining our economy, then I don't think there's a need to have a number that small when you've got a number of undocumented citizens or citizens who've come here illegally, and we're sustaining our economy just fine.
Here's a better question. How would you determine a better number for determining how many immigrants should come to the United States? There's a lot of intake information and variables that you have to analyze and make the adaptations to even figure it out. Okay, can we establish a certain quota for immigrants to come to the United States and then just shut it down and deny one over the other that might apply? That's creating like a non-consensual division or process without any fundamentals for it. If I can make it.
Yeah, but so let's throw some numbers out. So if we say we have a population of what is it, 300 million, 350 million people in the United States, if the number was no more than 10% immigrants, then at 2 million per year, we would basically only be able to sustain immigration for 15 to 17 years. Right? And so why should the number be higher?
Because as for it is, the United States already have about 15% of its population as immigrants. And determining how the immigrants in the United States that are already here becoming American and making it and assuming the incoming immigrants to the United States and adapting that number and figuring out, okay, let's raise it to 20% of the population and make it that as the ultimate number, and then being as a 1% rate per year. it's a very complex process, and I don't personally I don't think it would work. But
Ms.
some
Hoffman,
other,
Ms. Hoffman, what do you think? Do you think we should open up the borders and just let anyone come in, or do you think we should have some kind of a ratio to our population and say we can't go over it?
Okay, so no, I don't think we should have our borders open and let a bunch of people come in. We have a right to safety, as well as we have a right to be protected from those that do not want to do it the right way.
but here's the thing: the number is not affecting just the illegal portion of immigrants. The number is being determined by not the illegal, because you can't determine the legal number of immigrants coming to the United States. That number is being determined by the number of legal immigrants coming to the United States, because that's the data that the government has.
Right. I think that's where the problem lies, is not necessarily in, yeah, we should maybe have an equation that equips us to know what we can sustain or what's a viable number for the United States. But at the same time, the sole problem lies in the legislation that already exists. I think we as a country have to reform this legislation to say the process to legally get here and to become a citizen of the United States and to sustain life here is this. And so long as we're just trying to put Band-Aids on the boo-boos that are already existing, that's where we end up in this rut that we're in now.
Well, then let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the legislation and some of the proposals that are being put forward. So first of all, let's think about it from the conservative perspective. What basically appears to be the solution being proposed by most of the Republican or conservative candidates for the presidency, or by most of the Republican leadership? Where do they stand?
When it comes to Hillary, Hillary is all for the immigration reform, but she's also for the fact that there should be a pathway to citizenship. You know, as for Obama as well. I think they're against, you know, protecting the United States, but as well as they're like you said, they should make it so hard and so expensive for someone to become an American citizen. And when it comes to Hillary, you know, she as mindset and one-minded as she is, she does believe that we should make it easier for people to become Americans.
But for the conservatives, oh, no?
I was just going to say, aside from the black eye, I think that one candidate particularly has given probably the Conservative Party. Most conservatives vie for tighter border security and then making pathways to legal immigration, while Democrats are kind of opposite. We need to make legal pathways for immigration and then, you know, figure out how to better protect our borders.
Why do the two sides appear to have a different preference? Why does it seem conservatives are for security first and then pathway, whereas Democrats are for a pathway and then security?
I don't know exactly why the conservatives are thinking the way they are, but looking from the liberal perspective, they kind of look at it. The studies I've seen have been talking more about the economic cost of trying to put in some type of legislation and trying to tighten up the borders and trying to deport. Like when Trump came out with his policy, they were trying to study and figure out how much it would cost to actually go in and try to deport all the illegal immigrants into the country. And they said it would cost over $200 billion just to round up people, and it's just not an American idea to go around grabbing people, you know, out of their homes, round them up, and then ship them back to their country where you don't know, they don't have anywhere to live, they don't have homes there anymore. And then also the cost of constructing a wall would be around $6 to $7 billion on top of that, and you're talking about these numbers just to hold out immigration would be half the national deficit in the last couple of years.
But here's the thing, on the conservative side, the way Obama's administration and the Democrats want to address the illegal immigrants situation is that it costs money. The document process, the documentation process that would take place for all the illegal immigrants that are already here in the United States would cost way too much for the government, and it would increase the budget. The conservative side want to address a problem by reducing the number of immigrants without not really paying attention to the problem in the states, while the Democrats see the reality as it is and try to make the undocumented illegal immigrants in the United States become part of a data that the United States had.
But if you want to set limits, which apparently conservatives do, again, most conservatives that I've heard, and I certainly know that the Bush-McCain plan was this way, most conservatives that I've heard speak are saying not that immigrants are inherently bad, but illegal bad. And so wouldn't it be fair to say, okay, we're willing to spend money to keep you out of this country. We know that it's going to cost us money to keep you out of this country. So don't come in the first place. I mean, isn't it true that if we just say, well, this problem is too difficult, it just kind of go away, then the immigrants will go ahead and come anyway.
It's a valid answer to the problem, creating more barriers and make it more bureaucratic for illegal immigrants to come to the United States. So I see on the conservative side a valid response on imposing more difficulties and more of a lengthy process where the illegal immigrants would just give up on coming to the United States at first place, and then having as a remaining option just going through the legal process.
Ms. Dow, what do you think? Do you think that the Republican proposal is just ridiculous on its face because it's so costly, or do you think that we have to be able to demonstrate a credible willingness to actually fight to keep people out of our country, otherwise they'll just go ahead and come?
It's a hard question for me because, for me, I think there's a happy medium, and I think that so long as we're focused on the exponential cost of keeping people out of our borders, I think the less we focus on reforming the laws that make legal citizenship available. And so on the Republican side, the worry is always building up the wall, building up the wall. Let's figure out how to keep them out, rather than let's figure out how to deal with the ones that are already here and make legal pathways for the ones who are desiring to come here, and see how the costs vary on that scale.
And the conservatives, by doing that, would be also addressing another important question, that how are the international community handling the immigration process? For example, how is China and Mexico and India, the ones that are sending the most immigrants, would address the situation in case the United States would implement more bureaucratic processes for the illegal immigrants, you know? Because for many speeches that they've given, the idea of having the Mexican government sitting down with the American government to settle the situations haven't been properly done by the Democrats. So the conservative side is paying attention to it.
So coming back to the Democratic side, Ms. Hoffman, you had mentioned earlier that Obama and Clinton seem to have some differences of opinions. What about the differences between Clinton and her opponent in the primaries, Bernie Sanders? Is there any difference between their two approaches, or are they sort of in agreement on how to deal with immigration?
I think Sanders' approach is more adequate, in my opinion. I think they have some similarities when it comes to how approaching to keep America safe, but at the same time they have a lot more differences. But like I said back in the beginning, you know, the pathway to citizenship is important to Sanders.
And I understand also. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think on the face of the Democratic Party, especially in light of the recent debate, it seems to be pretty similar as far as how they would handle it. I think the only difference is that Clinton has had a chance as Secretary of State to kind of back the Obama administration and how she feels that she sides with it. There's some things I think she would change, but she sides with it for the most part. And I think what separates them is their past. Bernie Sanders in 2007 had a voting record of voting against the reform package that came up because he said that it allowed for guest worker status, which would basically allow immigrants here and be able to work, but like for low wages under basically slave-like conditions. And so I think coming now into light of the presidential election, I think those are things that are going to catch up with politicians, are the things that they've done in the past rather than the reform they push for on the new front.
In my opinion,
I do understand
Hmm?
Go ahead, Mr. Costa.
In my opinion, Bernie Sanders is doing a brilliant job by adapting and reformulating the way Obama had addressed the immigration problem by pulling together the DREAM Act, the immigration reform that was attempted a year ago, and addressing the problem of the undocumentation, bringing the illegal immigrants out of the unknown and being known by the government. And his proposals are really concise in a sense.
And I do understand, as y'all pointed out, there is some disagreement within the conservative camp. From what I'm hearing, about the only opposition that's appearing to a potential Paul Ryan speakership has actually come from opponents of immigration. Because it seems that Paul Ryan, as a pro-business Republican, tends to be a bit more in favor of immigration maybe than some of the other sort of law and order or nationalism-based Republican candidates are. So moving on to a couple of other of the finer details of immigration. When having this debate about what to do with immigrants, there are several points of contention on how to resolve the issue that keep coming up. And so I kind of want to go through a few of these one at a time and maybe get your opinions on what we should do about them. So the first one, this idea of birth citizenship. On the one hand, there's this fairly liberal notion that anyone born in the United States is immediately an American citizen. On the other hand, many conservatives seem to be of the opinion that you shouldn't be an American citizen just because you're born here. If your parents weren't legal, then you shouldn't be legal. I've even heard the term anchor babies being used to describe these people. What do you think? On which side of this issue do you think most Americans would come down?
I'm not sure.
Go
ahead. I would say I'm not sure as far as there's probably polls that have been taken, and I haven't researched to know the numbers on that. But I think just the term anchor baby is so deeply rooted in a negative connotation that people don't really understand maybe the right that they do have because they were born on American soil as an American citizen. So I think what that comes down to is just the connotation behind it. But I think it would be interesting to see the numbers.
I haven't ever heard the term anchor babies, but if you think about it and the connotation that brings to it, it's a sad reality to the United States. People do that, and the immigrants know how the process works, and they are trying to find holes within the system where they can take advantage of. So yes, the problem of what is a birthright? Would the child be required to get to the 18 years old mark and then after that become an American citizen, or have a process where that child would become an American, or require children to be part of the American education system? Because just having a baby wouldn't necessarily grant certain rights and opportunities to their parents, but wouldn't really be addressing the problem.
Mr. Ratliff, coming back to you then, what about a second point of contention? This idea of children who are brought to the United States illegally when they're very young, as minors. They didn't necessarily break the law because they were brought in by their parents, and now they're in the United States. What do you think public opinion would be on that? Should we force them to go back? Should we let them stay but keep the parents out? Should we provide them access, a special pathway into legal status? What do you think? Where do you think we are?
I definitely don't think that it would be wise to let the children stay and then to move their parents, deport their parents, because then you're just leaving these kids here and then you put them into foster care. I don't even know what type of system you would have to put these children into. But if these kids are brought here and they've been raised in American society, if they've gone through school here, I don't know exactly if they're brought here illegally, how they go through the schooling system, how they get into the education system, or how they're integrated into society. But I would say that they're fairly Americanized, and at this point, you shouldn't just deport them because as children they were brought here into this country. It wasn't, their choice to break the law. It was probably to avoid the circumstances of where they were born at and try to find a better life for them and future generations.
But how do you measure this idea of Americanized? Because what you seem to be suggesting is if they sound like they're American, if they use and speak English well, if they've been somehow brought up in our culture and they like baseball instead of soccer, they can stay. How do you evaluate that?
I don't think there's like a raw number. We can't test and see how American someone is. But growing up in America is certainly different than growing up in a country where they're worried about getting the next meal, worried about having a home, having something over their head at night. It's just, I don't know. It's not something you can really measure.
Yeah, but what would you then have the test of the green card test?
One quick point of clarification on my part. I should have said American football instead of soccer. I keep forgetting that American baseball is actually quite popular in many parts of Central and Latin America. I'm sorry, Mr. Costa, didn't interrupt. Go ahead.
No, but it's just the idea of what would we do, have the green card test of what is the Constitution, how many presidents the United States had, have that apply to children, and then, okay, if you pass a test, so we will give you the green card or the citizenship. You can't really determine. It's a dichotomy of the dual citizenship problem. I don't think there's
I think in all situations we have to remember that at the end of the day these are people, and in specific children that we're talking about, they're not numbers, they're not just statistics, they're people. And so when you come to the idea of what do we pack them up and ship them back, do we kick them out? I mean, you have to honestly, I think, look at each situation and probably be unique, but you have to remember, like Levi said, these are children, and you can't just separate them from their families or send them back and keep their parents. And I think a lot would have to go into each case to determine what to do.
But here's a controversy. They have attempted to create a process where if a student would do the American high school and the college, government would grant an extra 6 years or 5 years for that person to remain legal in the United States to look for jobs, but that was vetoed in the United States Congress. So they couldn't even stay, the immigrants, the students, they couldn't even stay in the States for 6 extra years. And how are you going to change that permanently,
Go ahead.
I was going to add on, say it all comes back down to the laws that are already in place that need to be reformed. So.
Well, let's do a couple more of these. What about this idea of a guest worker status? This was something that George Jr. had proposed during his reforms. This idea that we grant you a 5-year worker visa, and then after that 5 years, you either have to go back home and reapply or be sponsored by a local company. Do you think that something like that makes sense?
I'll say absolutely not. I think maybe to some ears in America that are focused on economics and who have a fear of them coming and stealing our jobs and raising our taxes or whatever, but I think that honestly to grant someone a guest worker status and to say that you can come here and you can work and we'll let you do this, but then you got to go back. I think 5 years is enough time to become accustomed to our culture and the way we do things, and then they're earning wages and they're getting into a lifestyle, and whether they're sending that money back home or they're sitting on it here, you're just going to send them back after 5 years and disrupt their entire way of life that they've become accustomed to. I just can't see it.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say that I think I can understand a working program where people can come over here and work for a couple of years, but I don't think the end game of a worker program should be you either have to leave or reapply. It should be you work here for 2 years, you do your due diligence, you pay taxes, you become a citizen. It should be something that there's some type of incentive for them to come here, not the threat of, unless someone wants you to come back and work, is maybe not even a full citizen or a second-hand citizen, whatever you want to call these people that don't get the same rights as average Americans. There should be something that if you do your job, you pay into the system, you follow the law, you get to become an American citizen.
Right, and I agree with you, Levi, and I agree with Kadada as well. What if they come here on a guest worker visa, and what if they're here for 5 years, and in that period of time they, find an American citizen and they get married, or if they have a child, then what are you supposed to do? You can't just tell them, oh, you're 5 years up, you have to go back. That's not completely fair, especially if they already have children within that 5-year time span. And like you said, they have a life and they've built things and they have a home. They're not going to want to go back, and it's not fair. They shouldn't have to go back. They're here for 5 years. They've lived as an American. They've worked and they've followed our rules. They've done everything to the T. They should be able to stay.
Well, if that's the case, then, and I'm opposed to the idea of them staying, it really kind of backs me in the corner, doesn't it? If I basically am saying, or if I'm a conservative who believes that we should limit the number of immigrants in America, then even the guest worker status is not an option for me, because once they're here forever, so I just can't let them come at all. Is there really no kind of an in-between ground where we can reach some kind of a compromise?
That's where the problem is, because we can't seem to figure it out the answer for that problem, and we can't create quantitative measures for it, or how to determine accomplishments. If a immigrant here is not being a additional person for the United States, not having a job, should that person be expelled of the country, or how do you measure contributions of an immigrant? Is it following the laws, having a child, be able to go to vote, or having a job and contribute to Social Security? I don't think there's a middle ground, and that's why we can't seem to find the answer for the immigration problem.
All right. Last one, and then we're almost out of time. This idea that I think Ms. Hoffman had just mentioned a second ago, this idea of if you're here illegally, do we create some kind of a pathway to permanency or a pathway to citizenship? Or if you're here illegally, do we tell you you have to leave, and since you've broken our laws once, the doors are permanently closed to you? Where do you think we should come down on this one?
For me, that's an easy answer for me.
Mr. Ratliff, go ahead.
Okay, I would definitely say that we need to create a path to citizenship. I think it needs to be reformed. There need to be legislation putting more money into creating an infrastructure to make this reasonable, to make this where you're able to process and put these people into a system that allows them to become citizens in the United States, because it's going to cost money to put this system in, but over the years you're integrating all these people into the workforce. And I mean, with the baby boomers coming up and Social Security drying up, this would be an influx of money coming into Social Security that could help us to sustain it for several more years.
Kadada, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, for me, it's an easy answer. I think that what the Obama administration has proposed, at least on surface, for the illegal immigrants that are already here, to create a pathway to citizenship. I read somewhere the other day, I think it was on the conservative side, of creating a pathway to citizenship, but those who are already here would have to leave and then come back after they reapplied or after they applied. And so to me, that's just disrupting lives, families. I mean, we got to look at it on the humanitarian side, that you wouldn't want someone to come in and disrupt your happy home. So,
Rebecca?
I agree with Kadada. We shouldn't have the power to rip away families. We shouldn't do that to them. Like I said, if they're willing to for those 5 years, follow all the rules, and they build a family, they keep up the status of, like you said, an American way of life, then they should be able to stay. We shouldn't have the right to tell them, oh, you need to go back. And who's to say that when their 5 years are up that they're going to want to go back, or even allow you to let them go back, because they're just not going to. You're just ripping families apart, and it's not fair.
Mr. Costa, it looks like you get the last word.
Misconceptions exist, and I think that could potentially be the root of the problem of immigration. So, as far as how it is now, the only thing that I would say is the immigrants should come out of the shadows and legitimize the problem and have the government to address the situation, and the Americans should definitely inform themselves and have fundamentals whenever they create arguments when addressing the situation.
Well, it sounds like from the conversation we've had that it's a fairly complicated situation, a fairly complicated issue, and one that we're probably going to be having to deal with for quite some time to come. Well, I would like to remind any of the viewers who've been following us at home that next week we're going to be switching to our new time. Instead of broadcasts, this week we've switched to our new time, rather. Instead of broadcasts being on Tuesday, they're going to be continuing to be on Thursday for the next several weeks. And so we hope that you all join us for our broadcast next week, Thursday at 1 p.m. on October 27th, where I believe the topic of conversation is going to be income inequality in America, and some plans or some proposals for how to address that. In the meantime, thank you very much, and I would like to say thank you to all of my panelists, and we hope to see you again next time. Have a good day.